Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more buckshot testing. And today, we've got another new shell out here today that we haven't tried yet, and one that I'm definitely curious to see how it does, and especially to see if it's worth the price tag associated with it or not, because it better do pretty decently to be able to justify it. So for the shell I've got here today, I picked up some of these, the Winchester Defender double-aught buck loads. These are the 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch 9 pellet double-aught buck loads, going about 1145 feet per second. And these are a copper plated buckshot, and it says here that they have manageable recoil through a defensive shotgun. So is that technically a low recoil load? I don't necessarily think so, but with it only being 1145 for the velocity, it is a little bit less oomph behind it than some of your other buckshot loads, so maybe there's something to that. But what I do think we might have going for us is this picture looks like these shells have a wad, and from testing, it seems like buckshot does better when it has a wad. So will these loads actually pattern good or not? That remains to be seen, really. And as for the setup I've got to test them through today, it's not necessarily a defensive style shotgun, but it's still going to allow us to test this and see what kind of performance we can actually get. So I've got the Remington 1187 back out here again. However, for chokes, I currently have a cylinder bore choke in the gun right now, and that leads us into, well, how exactly do I want to test these today? So as for the testing, I figured we'll do a defensive range, which is about 7 yards typically anyway, for what a lot of people like to use. We'll shoot a pattern with the cylinder bore choke, an improved cylinder choke, a modified, and a full choke, and see which one of those gives us the best pattern with these shells at that 7-yard distance. And then we'll take the best performer and we'll back it out to 25 yards, even though that might be a little bit farther than defensive range, but we'll move it out a little bit farther and see, using the best choke combination, what kind of pattern we can get at kind of medium range. So with that being said, let's head over to this target and get you guys set up with a view. We'll start with the cylinder bore choke at 7 yards on the top left circle. And I did forget to mention, I do have my chronograph out here as well, so we will be able to get our average velocity and how close it is to the box. But either way, let's get you guys to view this target. 7 yards, top left dot with the cylinder bore choke, and see what kind of pattern we could actually get. Alright, so let's take a quick look at our cylinder choke here and see what it gave us. As you can see, we hit that top left circle up there, and it gave us a 4 3/4 inch spread. So not anything that I would call terrible, but definitely not anything I'd call impressive either. So far, even with a cylinder choke, a federal flight control load would be a lot tighter than that. And on top of that, this is a 9 pellet load, and I only count 8 holes in this target. Unless one pellet went exactly precisely in the same hole as another one, we got one missing pellet somewhere in that pattern. As you can see, the wad did impact over there, so that's definitely not a pellet impact. But let's move it over to that top right dot over there. I may aim just a little bit low to avoid that big gash in the paper, but we'll step it up to the improved cylinder choke at the same 7-yard distance and see what we get out of that. Alright, so now let's take a quick peek at our improved cylinder group, and that's what we got over here. Now I did aim a little bit off to the right just to try and avoid that big slash mark in the paper. So our improved cylinder choke gave us 3 1/4 inches worth of spread, and once again, I only count 8 pellet holes in that pattern there. Now, yes, we did have the wad hit right there in the middle, but either way, we did improve as compared to our cylinder bore choke, so maybe these might like a little bit more choke. So with that being said, let's put the modified choke in the gun, and we'll move to that bottom left circle down there and take another shot and see how that modified choke does, and if these shells like the little bit more constriction or not. Alright, so now let's look at our modified choke group, which is down here on the bottom left. And on one hand, the overall group went back up to 4 inches, but we did clearly have a flyer off the top right edge. But our main core area here is 2 inches, which looks pretty good. The wad did hit low, but we're not really too concerned about that. But I was actually able to count 9 pellets total in this group. So either we had 2 significant flyers in the first 2 groups, or more than likely we had 2 pellets in the same hole so close together that you just couldn't really tell a difference as to where those 2 pellets hit. So overall here, although we did have that one flyer up in the top left that did increase the group size to 4 inches, the core area of our group right there looks really good. So let's move over to the bottom right circle. We'll put the full choke in the gun, still at 7 yards, and see if it likes the full choke as well, or if we've hit the point where we've kind of hit the constriction limit. So let's throw the full choke in the gun and see what kind of group it can give us. All right, so now let's take a look at our full choke group down here in the bottom right, and it gave us a 2.5 inch total spread here. And we don't see one flyer like we did with the modified choke. Now, is that an outlier over there? Maybe, but the overall pattern on this full choke is a little bit better at the same time. But it absolutely seems like either a modified or a full choke right here is the way to go as compared to a cylinder bore or an improved cylinder, which for a defensive load, a lot of defensive shotguns are going to be either cylinder bore or improved cylinder. I definitely would prefer to have these run through a tighter choke, that's for sure. So with that being said, I'm going to leave the full choke in the gun and we'll back it out to 25 yards now, which is a little bit farther than a lot of defensive range, but it is right in that mid-range type of distance. So we'll leave the full choke in the gun, we'll back out to 25 yards, and we'll shoot a group right there at that middle dot and see how much our spread actually opens up. All right, so now let's take a look at our 25-yard group here in the middle with our full choke. And it's pretty impressive, or at least not exactly what I would have thought. Backing from 7 yards all the way out to 25 with the same choke, we went from 2.5 inches to 5.5 inches there, which is not bad at all. Now we do start to see those little flyers and strings, so maybe these shells might just have a flyer or 2 in them on occasion, but 5.5 inches at 25 yards, that's not too terrible. And yeah, it would absolutely do the job if you needed it for a defensive purpose. But if you had a defensive style shotgun that had a cylinder bore or an improved cylinder choke in it, I seriously think that the flight control loads are a better option for you. So not too bad overall here, although I do wish those more open chokes were a little bit tighter because it is a defensive style load. But I guess it's not terrible overall, but I don't know if it's worth the price or not, which we'll talk about more in just a second. Okay, so let's go through our chronograph numbers here real quick and take a look and see what it gave us. Remember, the box is claiming 1145, and we never actually quite saw that number. It was definitely bouncing around the 1100 mark, so definitely a little bit lower on the velocity side for buckshot load. And yes, I would say their claim of lower recoil is true. And if anybody's curious, yes, they did cycle properly through my 1187. But let's go through the numbers and see what it actually did give us. So for a high, we had 1114. For a low, it gave us 1065. That gave us an average of 1091, an extreme spread of 49, and a standard deviation of 17. So with that average of 1091, you're definitely going to be a little bit lower in the recoil department and stuff like that. So for a defensive load, would absolutely do the job for you, no doubt about it. Although it is a little bit under their box claim anyway. Okay, and here's the wad out of that shell. And as you can clearly see, it is definitely a 2 3/4 wad. It's not a big old long full length like 3-inch style wad here. It almost looks like a Target style wad. And the pedals do have the ribs on them as well to give them a little bit of extra strength, I guess. So overall, I think the wad did its job for how this shell is actually loaded. Do I think it's as good as the flight control wads in their buckshot loads? No, not really. But I guess it did good enough for what it was designed for in this specific test anyway. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about that performance there? Is it anything out of this world amazing? No, I wouldn't say so. Do I think it's a little bit better than like a Winchester Super X buckshot load? Yeah, potentially. At defensive ranges, that is anyway. However, do I think it's worth the $22 a box that these shells cost? I don't think so, in my opinion anyway. They're not a bad shell, it doesn't appear, but when you can get flight control loads for much less than that, to have a potentially the same or better performing shell out of your setup, especially if it's a more open choke or no choke at all. So do I think they're worth the $20 to $22 a box for these? I don't think so in my opinion, but I'll let you guys make the call on that one. But with that being said, leave your thoughts about them in the comments, and if you've tested them, what have they done for you as far as performance goes? Let me know all that down in the comments. So on that note, as always, we have the channel Instagram as well as a mailbox where you can send things if you'd like. All that information will be in the description for you if you're interested, but I'm going to get back to the testing for y'all, so I'll see y'all in the next one.